Hi, welcome to another episode of the Armchair Geographer. It's absolutely wonderful to be with you. Today, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the housing issue in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, in fact, a lot of Australian cities. For those of you who don't realise it and haven't listened to my accent closely, the Armchair Geographer is a site about urban planning issues, mostly, or actually planning issues. It's about filmmaking, it's about a whole pile of stuff, it's about getting the message out about how we do planning and all that sort of stuff. One of the issues that we have in Australia is that the cost of housing is going through the roof. When I was a young man and I started out with a young family and we bought our first house, housing costs then were around about 3 or 4 times household average income. Now what I want to say about that is household average income, 40 years ago, 30 something years ago, was about one income in most families. And most families in Australia at least, a man went out to work, he had a wife, she looked after the children, she might have worked part-time, she might have taught, nursed, done something else, but usually, and it was changing, I've got to say, 30 years ago, it was changing fairly rapidly, but usually we still had a model that was based on household income being one income. Now, household income is predominantly based on 2 incomes. Both people in the household working, where there are 2 people in the house. Of course, quite often you have single person households. We have a much larger proportion of single person households than we had many years ago. However, when I started out, which is what we were talking about a little while ago, there were probably it took around about 4 or 5 annual incomes to pay off a house, maybe as many as 6 annual incomes for the average annual income to pay off a house. Now it takes 12 years of income to pay off a house, and incomes have gone up very considerably, and there are 2 people paying off the household income. So there's been a very significant change, a huge change in the way that we deal with household income, a phenomenal change. Hopefully you get into a situation where over time you've started to get to a position where you can actually pay off some of that capital. But not everybody's doing that, and things are changing fairly rapidly. Yes, house prices are going up. Will they always go up? Will they always go up at that rate? And is it reasonable to have a housing situation in a country where what we really have is 12 years of income to pay off your house? Is that really what we're aiming for in Australia? Is that really what we want to achieve? Well, I don't think it is. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think that we do planning really badly. I remember some years ago, a friend of mine actually said to me, he said a planner that I worked with at a Central Coast council, I'll tell you, Gosford Council, said to me, Viv, we're not here to make a better world. We're here to protect property values. That's our job. Town planners, we're here to protect property values. Really? Are we supposed to be making property values become something that, and property prices become something that is completely unreachable for our children? Am I ranting and raving? Am I just an old bloke who's looking at my kids and going, well, they'll never be able to afford to move into a house, so maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe I'm just being petty about it. But wait a minute. My kids aren't out of the ordinary, and they will never be able to afford to buy a property. That used to be the Australian dream. So what went wrong? What do we protect? What do we do wrong that actually makes housing prices so expensive, and what could we change? Well, I think there's a lot of things we do wrong. One of them, I think, in Australia especially, is that we have a very narrow range of housing styles. Much too narrow for what we really need. Whatever happened to the idea in Europe and in other countries of just allowing a son or a daughter to get married and then add on to that house, put another house on the block and live there. Why do we assume that that's a bad thing? Why do we assume it's a bad thing? Well, partly because we assume that property developers are just going to try and squeeze as much building onto the block of land as they possibly can, and then they're going to sell that to some poor unfortunate folk, and there's not going to be any recreation room around it. Well, why don't we provide recreation room elsewhere? Why do you need some open space around the house that you're in? Another thing that we do, and I think we do very badly, is the narrow band of the types of houses that we provide is one of the things that I think we do really badly. Houses, townhouses, units, flats. To some extent, we provide for terrace houses, narrow frontage, 2, maybe 3 stories, walk up, and a tiny little backyard. But we don't do much outside that housing style. There are lots and lots of other opportunities that could be in our suburbs, guys. Why don't we get on with it? Why don't we do that? Why don't we do it as well as we can? Well, the question I've got is, are we going to change the way that we manage our cars? Are we going to go for go-gets? Are we going to go for a lot more, and we need a lot more density to make go-gets work. If you're going to put a go-get in the street, you need flats, townhouses, units, you need a lot of people, you need quite a bit of density to make that actually work. So you're not going to get that unless you actually force people into slightly higher densities than what we've got. And then, of course, some cities have the capacity to just keep growing beyond where they are now. Let's take Melbourne, for instance. It's in a relatively flat hinterland. Melbourne can just spread out and out and out. It is about the interface between agricultural land and urban land, and how urban land is constantly encroaching on agriculture, and that creates a whole pile of conflicts. Not only creates a whole pile of conflicts, but it creates spread. And not only is there a financial cost to the building of a house as you get further and further and further away from your infrastructure and have to extend infrastructure, but there's also a cost on people as they have to commute long distances into the middle of a city. Let's just think about the house. Let's say you buy a 400 square metre house with a 25 metre frontage. That frontage is a frontage to a road. A lot of people forget that you're paying, when a new subdivision goes in, the person who builds that road is the property developer. He has to put that road in. So he divides the cost of the roads and the water pipes and the sewer pipes and the telephony that goes under the underground, and the electricity lines and maybe gas and whatever other utilities go underground or go under that road, the stormwater pipes that he's going to use to take stormwater away. All of those costs that are in that infrastructure out in front of your house, half the width of that road is paid for by the person who buys that house. So every time you extend further out and further away from the city and you build new roads, where does the cost go? The cost goes to the person who is buying that house. That is added to them. The developer doesn't provide that road for free. The developer has to make a profit. Does this sound like a little bit of a rant? It does sound like a rant. One of the reasons that we put people on smaller and smaller and smaller blocks is to reduce housing cost, because it reduces the cost of not just the land that the house sits on, but the cost of all of the infrastructure. The infrastructure that goes with that house. So once you start thinking about all of that, and the open space and the stormwater stuff that needs to go in, and that's not just stormwater that's underground, you're also paying for additional utilities, growth in the water supply, growth in the electricity supply, growth in the sewerage ponds that need to collect and deal with your sewage at the end of the day. You're paying for all of that. That's a part of the cost. If we can reduce those costs, if we can put people into urban areas where those costs have pretty much already been paid for, yes, engineers will tell me there are going to be problems with stormwater. Once you start adding more hard area into existing urban areas, once you start doing that, they've designed the stormwater for so much hard area in the city, and increasing the amount of hard area, that is the amount of roofs, driveways, and other facility paths, roads, and all that sort of stuff that you get in the urban area, you're going to make water flow much more quickly into those stormwater systems, and those stormwater systems won't be able to cope. You're going to flush a lot more toilets, the sewerage system won't cope. But the cost of upgrading those existing stormwater systems and the existing sewerage systems is often a lot less than the cost of building new ones for those new suburbs that are way out in the boondocks, miles and miles away from the centre of the city. Plus, with going out of the city or out to the fringes of the city, you're losing agricultural land, you're losing productivity. And if we're talking about cities like Sydney and Melbourne, some of the most productive land that we've got is on the fringe of the city. I'm talking about the most productive land in Australia is close to or near the edges of Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra and Brisbane. So you've got some really good quality productive land. Not only are you taking up the land for the actual houses, but you're starting to create conflicts. Another issue is taking jobs out of the city and into outer city urban areas. So in Sydney, Penrith, and Liverpool and places around the city need to become the places that we grow. Campbelltown and Hornsby and Chatswood and all those sort of suburbs, all those places around the city, they're the places where we need to be growing jobs. What we need to do is very seriously rethink our urban planning paradigms. Now, it's easy to put higher density on the fringes of the city because there's nobody there yet and nobody will complain about it. It's part of the answer. Part of the answer is to do that and then put close to that employment centres, shopping centres, business centres and stuff that can keep people employed, that can reduce travelling back into the city and make those centres work in their own right. That is a good answer. That is part of the solution. But the real solution for Sydney and Melbourne especially, and to a lesser extent Brisbane, and of course the Gold Coast, what an awful city that is. But the Gold Coast, did I really say that out loud? Yeah, I did. I said that out loud. Gold Coast is an absolutely awful city. It's just freeways and high-rises and people on big blocks of land. Yeah, the climate's fantastic. Yeah, you're not far from the beach. Actually, you're getting further and further from the beach, and you're not getting further and further from the beach because you're moving out. You're getting further and further from the beach because it's taking you each year, it's taking you longer and longer to get there because you're getting traffic congestion because of the way the city's planned. If you live in the northern beaches of Sydney, when I grew up in the northern beaches of Sydney, it used to take 10 or 15 minutes to get to the beach on the weekend. On a hot summer's day, 40 degrees, surf's up, let's go. Beautiful day down on the beach, 10, 15 minutes to get there. I could ride there in 20 minutes, right? Drive there in 15 minutes. Now, I can't get a car parking space. Now, I can't drive there in 30 or 40 minutes. And I wouldn't cycle there. Holy dooly. The roads? No. They don't allow for cyclists. They don't allow for other alternatives. Oh, that brings me to another problem. The growth of cities, the zoning system that we have in most of our states, in all of our states, the zoning system that we have, which we've inherited in a post-automobile world, the zoning system that we have is really bad for our health. Why is it bad for our health? It traps us onto large blocks of land that use up a lot of the space that could have been used for passive and active recreation. There is nothing like getting people out into a little bit of bushland, not just for physical exercise, which you can do down at the gym. No, we're not talking about that. We're talking about mental recreation, but we are talking physical recreation. We're talking about getting people out, getting them moving around spaces in the city. If people live in cars and spend large amounts of time in cars, that is lost time to productivity, which is important, but more importantly, I think, it's lost time to families. If you're spending an hour and a half a day, or an hour and a half, or an hour each way, so 2 hours a day commuting, that is time that you don't have either at work to finish off those jobs that were really urgent, or at home to help out the family, to be part of the family. Love inside a family is spelled T-I-M-E, time. It's the time you spend with your family, it's the time you spend with your colleagues at work that builds relationships. If you spend time on your own, locked in a car, if you don't see your neighbours, if you go from the kitchen to the garage, open an electric door, drive out and drive all the way to work, you do not make other connections with people in your street or in your working neighbourhood. And so we shut down those other connections. Those other connections are lost connections in our lives. There's a lot wrong with the way we do cities. I could go on and on and on about this, but I'm hoping you've started to get the point. I don't want to give you all the answers or all the solutions. I don't even want to give you all the problems. What I want to do is have a bit of a rave that helps you understand that I think there's something wrong with our current planning system. And because there is something wrong with our current planning system, it's up to us, all of us, to get out there and start making something right. Good talking to you. This has been an episode of the Armchair Geographer. I hope we have a few more intersections like this when I rave on, perhaps about these things, perhaps about a few other things. Have a good day. Get out there, talk to your local council, tell them why you want, you demand them to think about changing the way they do planning in your city so that you have better opportunities, more capital growth, more people in your suburb, more enjoyment and more fun. Let's make cities better. Have a good day. See you.